Welcome, classroom and ELL teachers, to my assessment guide for classroom teachers of ELL students. I'd like to start by talking about assessment literacy. Here are 3 definitions that I found helpful. Assessment literacy is the knowledge, understanding, and application of assessment principles and practices necessary to support and empower students in their learning. That's from Assessment Literacy in BC, page 1. Those who are assessment literate understand how to gather dependable evidence and how to use it productively to support or certify achievement. That's from the National Task Force on Assessment Education for Teachers, page 2. And finally, assessment literacy is the capability of staff and students to make sense of assessments and, armed with this understanding, to exercise more control over teaching and learning. When designed and implemented effectively, formative assessment can help to develop student assessment literacy. And that is from the University of Reading. I came up with my own definition of an assessment literate teacher. Number 1, an assessment literate teacher understands that assessment can be used as a motivation and learning tool. Number 2, teachers can show students how to take ownership of their learning and make it into a lifelong habit. Number 3, student learning should reflect competencies such as communication, creative and critical thinking, and responsibility. Number 4, assessment should reflect individual goals. Number 5, assessment is more than answering questions. It's about doing new things, asking unique questions, and applying new strategies to build growth. And finally, number 6, assessment may be different from one child to another. These are my definitions of what assessment literacy looks like for me. If you were to make your own definitions, what would they look like? You may ask, why is assessment literacy important? With assessment literacy, each lesson and unit has a clear purpose and direction. A teacher is communicating goals clearly to the class. Students can be motivated with learning targets, and they can understand the why of what they're learning. For this presentation, I'm going to focus on assessing ELL for the age group of kindergarten to grade 5. On average, it takes 2 to 3 years to learn to speak a language fluently. It takes quite a bit longer to learn the academic part of a language, including writing effectively and communicating for a job. When we're assessing ELL students, we need to be careful to understand the expectations of language development. Students can't be expected to speak in full sentences right away and can communicate quite a bit with one-word replies and simple sentences. It's important that a student understands that it takes time to learn. As teachers, we need to communicate that to them and let them know that they're not expected to be perfect right away. Communicating expectations is important. And in light of a focus on assessment literate teaching, it's important for students to understand their individual goals. BC has a set of guidelines to assist ELL students called the BC ELL Guidelines. Classroom teachers may appreciate knowing these rubrics exist and are helpful to understand what's expected of your ELL students. The document can be found, including the link, in the references following this video. Here are some examples of what can be found in these rubrics. This example is from page 23 of the ELL Guidelines. As you can see, the oral expectations are clearly laid out with examples. One thing I really like about this is that students can use the next level up as a way to set personal learning targets. These oral targets are from page 39. The expectations of an older student are the same as their younger counterparts, but the examples include more mature expectations. There are also examples of ELL students at different levels of speech, reading, and writing on learnalberta.com. Here, teachers can watch examples of students at different levels. The levels are quite similar to the BC ELL guidelines. ELL teachers need to assess students for listening, which is receptive, speaking, expressive, reading, and writing, and there are different rubrics set out for all 4 areas. We can also use the BC ELL standards to assess writing samples. The ELL standards are helpful because they contain examples with helpful rubrics. For example, this is page 15 of the ELL standards for grades 1 to 3. If a student is at level 3, their writing should reflect what you see in the expanding column. This rubric can also be used to start setting goals for ELL students. A student at level 3 could have some goals set at level 4, like focusing on adding ideas to a topic or using strategies to write detailed sentences. Next, I'm going to talk about some strategies to address ELL learning targets. There's a lot either a classroom teacher or an ELL teacher can do to focus on oral language assessment in a positive, learning-focused way. Lori Hellman, Ann Ittner, and Kirsten McMaster wrote a book entitled Assessing Language and Literacy with Bilingual Students. In their chapter on the growth of oral language, they discuss many strategies to foster growth and positive assessments. During reading time, keep track of students who understand and are interacting with the content. Look for engagement. One way to do this would be to keep a simple checklist and monitor 2 to 3 students per reading time. This way you know who is able to understand and who isn't. This first example is from page 71. For those who struggle to interact, consider choosing books with more pictures and less words. Simple books will be more attainable for new ELL students. For new ELL students, use the point 2 method for checking which words they understand and which ones they don't. For example, point to your desk, or in a book, point to the green car, point to the teacher. This example is from pages 73 to 75. During class discussions and activities that involve speaking, keep track of who speaks in your class and who doesn't. Keep a tally to see who is quiet and may need help to build vocabulary and grow in confidence. To address their needs, provide examples, sentence organizers, or even sentence starters to help give them a good start. Finally, find ways to listen to your students with recording or a video. This way, you can identify areas they need to improve upon or any challenges that may be holding them back. For example, I used to have my students record themselves reading a story on Seesaw. I was then able to listen to them read that story by themselves in the privacy of the hallway or maybe a reading nook, and I was able to hear things that I would not have heard in a class discussion. I was able to hear who pronounced some words properly and some words improperly, for example. Or I could hear who was using a verb tense wrong, and that would give me something that I could focus on. It's okay for an ELL student to learn content in their home language and be assessed through interpreters or Google Translate, for example, on work they do in their home language. Only really language arts needs to be assessed in English. It's good for students to be challenged and do work that the rest of the class is doing. even if they don't know English yet. Let ELL students work on the same assignments as others, even either through writing in their home language or even using Google Translate to help them understand vocabulary within an assignment. Assessment can be a positive part of co-teaching. Honingsfeld and Dove, in their essay entitled Collaborating for English Learners, a Foundational Guide to Integrated Practices, mentioned several different ways of co-teaching. One of those ways, and in their essay it was Model 3, was one teacher teaches and the other assesses. There are many benefits to this. Having two teachers in one class will help notice students who don't understand or are being distracted. A second teacher can take notes on what students are doing to better help them and address their needs later. We need to think about and assess the tools we use for measuring growth. For example, PM benchmark is commonly used in Abbotsford as a way to assess reading. There are some positive things about PM benchmark, like its emphasis on fluency and comprehension, as well as decoding, but there are some cultural biases in the test as well. For example, it's expected that students understand words like cottage and sack and hens, when in their understanding those words may have an alternate meaning or something that's not appropriate. We need to think about that and in some cases do some pre-teaching when it comes to these kind of tests, or maybe address the test slightly different to make it equitable for all students. Those are just a few examples of how assessment can be used to encourage and support ELL students. Thank you for listening and spending time watching my video. Please take a look at the next slide. There will be a QR code to help you access my references.